I welcome you all back today to discuss hydroponics in a little more personal manner. We're going to go into a discussion today of how you can do hydroponics at home and how you can be a successful hydroponic gardener on your deck or patio, or in your garden. The the intention today is not to teach you everything that you need to know about hydroponics, but more to instill some curiosity so that you'll find out more and discover new ways of growing plants that you never thought was possible before. This is by no means the end all, but it is a beginning. It's some of the things that I'll show you are basic so that they apply to everyone who is growing hydroponically from an apartment deck to a multi-acre facility. So with that being said, you know, my feeling personally is that horticulture has become the new agriculture, and I say that, and if you were here for the last presentation that we did about the world of hydroponics, you'll understand that I'm very passionate about the fact that we have 2.5 billion more people that are going to be living on this planet in the next 30 years. And we don't have the facilities, we don't have the land, we don't have the capability to feed them. So we have to start looking at more efficient ways of producing food. And we have to look at more efficient ways of growing locally. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not distracting anyone when I look at my phone, but I'm staying on my script. So and I look at the priorities of the Master Gardener program, and this slide might be coming up for you to look at, and maybe if you weren't aware of this, the Master Gardeners have priorities, but when we deal with hydroponics, we're really hitting a lot of these priorities. The horticultural skill area. This definitely takes some skill. It takes some practice. It takes some knowledge, and frankly, those are all the things that make it fun. In our Master Gardener priorities, we say local food is a priority to us, and I think that I'm really encouraged to see the Master Gardeners going that direction. And local food couldn't be any more local than the food that we're producing hydroponically. Okay, and climate change is a priority for the Master Gardener program. There's nothing more relevant than hydroponics when it comes to climate change. And lastly, when we talk about clean water being a priority, clean water is what hydroponics is all about, using 10% or less of the water that we're currently using to grow the same amount of crops. So that kind of prefaces where I'm going and why. Hydroponics is growing soillessly, okay, without soil. And we may say, well, we need soil for our plants, but do we really? I mean, what is it that soil provides? It provides stability for the plant. Well, we can all provide stability for plants in various other ways. It provides food for the plants. Well, the soil doesn't really provide them, but it has access to the nutrients that we need through the microorganisms that are in the soil. So we can duplicate that, and the microbial benefits of soil, we can duplicate that in hydroponics too. In hydroponics, our plants grow with much less root system than they do in the soil. And in the soil, our plants are constantly on the move looking for nutrients to take in. Remember, it's only the root tip that takes in nutrient, and the root tip is constantly on the way looking for microbes or for water that it needs. In a hydroponic situation, there's no searching involved. It's all right there. So roots that are there are highly efficient. The growth of the plant is then highly efficient. When we grow hydroponically, and I hope we have this chart in front of us, but when we talk about the relationship between water use in a vertical farm or a greenhouse or open field production, it's incredible. Okay, right now the United Nations uh, produced some information on this. Says that in China today it takes over 36 gallons of water to produce a pound of tomatoes. In the United States, in our field crops, we average 15.6 gallons of water to produce a pound of tomatoes. In a hydroponic situation, we use a gallon and a half of water to produce a pound of tomatoes. We're also growing year round. We're growing 12 months of the year, not just through the season. We have higher yields, okay? And we have fewer food miles. And if you recall from our last discussion, we talked about some of the issues of growing food in other countries and then bringing it to your table. So the goal here is let's eat locally and have some fun. So we say that, you know, this is my conservatory. I grow things in here all year round. I grow a lettuce crop in my office all year round. It's not only fun, but for somebody like ourselves who we like enjoy gardening, it's fun not to have to stop gardening just because it froze outside and to continue gardening all year round. Remember, we can do this in a small space. I'll show you in a quick segment of a vertical wall in my office that contains 91 plants. Okay, it's 4 feet by 7 feet, and I've got 91 heads of lettuce growing in that small area. So anyone can garden. If you just put this on a windowsill, you're growing hydroponically, and you're also teaching people again the value of it. One of the things I like about it is when you take off to go to the lake to go fishing, you don't have to worry what the weather is or if somebody's watered the garden, or you don't have to be home waiting. Everything's already under control for you, and it'll be there when you get back. A lot of us produce a lot of food, and you know, if you read the newsletter from Tim Kenny this month, he suggested various sources that we can employ to be donating food to food shelves and people and food in need. Okay, when I overproduce from my garden and from my hydroponics, that food goes to food shelves, and why not? You know, it's how we give back. So with all that said, kind of an introduction, let's talk about selecting a method for how we're going to grow hydroponically. So you kind of need to learn the terms and the methods that are employed. We can grow things aeroponically. We grow things with deep water culture. We grow things with drip irrigation. We grow things through nutritional film. Let's start by talking about NFT, nutritional film. If you're reading various publications or looking at YouTube videos, it's also referred to as ebb and flow. And those aren't two people that live next door. What it means is that we have an ebb and a flow of the water and nutrients flowing through these pipes on a daily basis. So you're not in a constant state of water. The water flows through, feeds the roots, and then the roots have contact with air. Okay, and then they never dry out, but they're not in a constant state of water. I've shown a little chart for NFT production, and it's simple to do. You can do it in your backyard. You just need a pump to pump the water into the pipe and then flow that water back out of the pipe back into your storage bin. You know, I typically use big black 40-gallon bins with yellow tops and mix my nutrients, and there they are. So this gravity flow system that I'm showing in the photo was something that you can do at home. It takes a little skill working with pipes and so forth, but you know, if that kind of adventure appeals to you, then go for it. It takes a little bit to get that perfected, but it's very satisfying when you're done. I also show a picture of growing a vine crop in an ebb and flow system, and it's very effective. So you can grow your tomato plants, your cucumbers, whatever it might be, in that method. Use your imagination. The sky's the limit. You can mount this stuff right on a wall. You can, you know, put it out in the middle of the garden, put it out on the bed. I've also got another little sketch there. So what I'm doing is just trying to stimulate your imagination and show you that there's many ways of doing this. Simple backyard NFT methods. A method that we call the Kraki method, and it's K-R-A-T-K-Y, is also called the float system. And in the Kraki method, what we do is we just put the plant in the water and then let it develop there. Not fully submerged, but as the roots develop and get more, you know, more substance to the root system, then some of that is in the air, some of that's in the water. And I'll show you some examples of how we do that, but you can do it just so easily. You can just put holes in the top of that bin and grow your plants right there in that bin. Some people use styrofoam and this is the way Revel does it down in Medford, but they'll take styrofoam with holes in it and put their net cup meaning the little cup, they'll put their net cup right in the styrofoam, let it float in the water until it's matured. So I've got a little drawing, a little sketch there of the Kraki method, and you can follow that it's the quickest and easiest way of doing things. This is the windowsill method. So when you're growing, you know, a little lettuce or something on your kitchen windowsill, even your herbs, then it's we would consider it the Kraki method. I'll bring this up a little later when I'm talking about it. Dutch buckets, the term Dutch comes from the fact that this method was originally designed in Holland, and it was developed for growing flowers, cut flowers, but quickly adapted for growing vegetables. And so the Beto, it's also called Beto bucket, B-A-T-O. And the Beto bucket or the Dutch bucket is a real fun way of growing plants. I've got a Beto bucket set up in the backyard. Here I've shown a Beto bucket at the greenhouse that we toured, and it's a real fun way of doing it, real simple. I'll explain it in a little bit more detail as we go forward. But the Beto bucket is best for tall crops, your vine crops and so forth. We're gonna show you a living wall and talk a little bit about how living walls work. I have a picture here of gem lettuce that I was cutting off of my living wall a couple of weeks ago before I started my new crop on my living wall. Again, I'm growing that right in the house, and it's a great pleasure, a lot of fun. Aeroponics then is another term in hydroponic growing. Aeroponic towers are designed as vertical towers, and the vertical tower sits over its own water reservoir, and the water then is pumped to the top and either flows down the roots or it's sprayed on the roots coming down the tower. This isn't the cheapest way to go. I've only known one person so far that was able to develop his own aeroponic tower, and he was pretty clever. But use your imagination with the aeroponics towers. You can go a long ways with them. And typical aeroponic tower will grow about 45 plants at a time. In commercial aeroponics, for instance, these towers will be 80 feet tall. So they remove the entire tower, harvest it, and then place the tower back into position again. 10 feet high. What we've got is 91 plants growing here. We harvested our lettuce crop out of here a week and a half ago, and then we started new seedlings, and the seedlings then have been planted in here for about 3 days, and the seedlings will be ready to harvest in about a month. So we'll take a look at a living wall and consider this option for people for growing at home. This living wall is about 4 feet by 4 feet, has about 30, 40 plants in it. I have a living wall in my office at home that's about this, but it's 7 feet tall, has 90 plants in it where we're growing lettuce. This particular living wall is growing herbs. And as you can see from this, we have a water reservoir down here in which we're maintaining chemicals, the proper ppm and pH in this water. And that water then is pumped to the top. It drips down through the plants, and then the water is collected in the reservoir below. We are keeping our lights on here today. This is kind of a blurple LED. We call it blurple because we can't really tell you what color it is. But it's a good way to keep light balanced in here on days that it gets a little dark outside. This is a real fun project and something simple to do at home. And this is what we call a Dutch bucket, and it's also called a Bato bucket, B-A-T-O. And in a Dutch bucket, this is where I grow my tomatoes, my cucumbers, my vine crops are in a Dutch bucket situation. Mine is outside. This happens to be indoors because this is the season where we can show you how this application works. I take a 5-gallon pail and I put a 5-gallon paint strainer in that pail. And then what we do is we fill it with perlite, and the perlite then acts as a substrate. We put a hole in the top of your pail and plant your plant right in there. Put your drip irrigation in here. The drip irrigation is coming from your reservoir down below, and it drips through the bucket, collects at the bottom of the bucket, and goes back to the reservoir and supplies there. For successful hydroponic growing is that you're maintaining the water level at a proper pH for the plant that you're growing. You can grow almost any plant imaginable. I think in the handout that you've received, you'll see a lot of different plants in there, plants that maybe you didn't even think you could grow. But they all have optimum pH levels, and pH levels will vary. Aeroponic means that we have roots that are growing inside the plant and inside the tower. So these young plants, these plants are about 2 weeks old and have been planted in the rockwool. Okay, we start the rockwool in a germination bed, and then once they get a secondary leaf on them like this, then we'll bring the rockwool out and set it into the tower. The tower has a reservoir, 25-gallon reservoir, down at the bottom, in which all of the nutrient is held. Okay, this nutrient then is pumped up to the top of the reservoir, and then in this particular case, it sprays the roots of the plants, and we do this several times a day. We also supplement with air. With an aeroponic tower, we do get a lot of aeration. That's just right in the word, and probably don't need to be using an air pump, but it's like belts and braces. So we keeping oxygen levels
in the water is extremely important. So we can grow lettuce, you can grow ambitious crops, you can grow a tomato or whatever you might want in here. A lot of fun growing radishes. You can root crops growing right on aeroponic tower. But typically we're growing lettuce and leaf crops. That's the quickest and easiest. We can typically look at most of our leaf crops from seed to finish in about 45 days. The pH level varies right away, so keep an eye on your pH, okay? And then what we call soluble salts or electroconductivity of the water means that we're measuring that in parts per million. And what we need to do is keep an eye on the water and the nutrient level in the water, and that's going to be done by measuring in parts per million. Know what your water is before you put it in the bucket. My water at home in Burnsville goes through my water softener, and if I were to test it, it would be probably about 700 parts per million. And yet I run it through my reverse osmosis. It's down about 30 parts per million. Just for kicks, I checked Dasani water, and Dasani water was at 0 parts per million. So soluble salts in the water are going to be very important to maintaining a successful plant. When nutrients come up through the plant, nitrogen is the easiest nutrient for the vascular system of the plant to pull through. And as we all know, transpiration is almost like the plant sweating, right? That's the moisture coming up off the leaf, and in the respiration process, it's coming off that leaf, right? So what we want this plant to do is pull through a lot of water, and when it does so, it brings up the micronutrients. So things like calcium that are much heavier and more difficult for the plant to bring up, we need the plant to be moisture up. So one of the ways we do that is we keep a fan going, all right? We also try to keep humidity levels fairly high. And of course outdoors in Minnesota, that's not a problem in the summer, is it? But in a room such as this, we're typically humidity levels of above 50 and below 70. And we also know that at higher humidity levels, we have better control over insects as well as healthier plants. We're now going to talk a little bit about some of the tools and techniques that you need to have and to use in your home hydroponic setup. Whether you're doing your hydroponics outdoors or indoors, a lot of the same rules apply. And so everyone's curious about how do we fertilize this water? Well, I think I've shown an illustration there of an example of some different types of plant food on the market. You can buy this stuff locally at your organic hydroponic stores. There's one in Richfield, one in St. Paul, one in St. Louis Park. Or you just go to online to order fertilizers. But your fertilizers are concentrated, and what you need to do when you're mixing your fertilizers for your hydroponics is to pre-mix them in a bottle or a quart of water, and then take that and add it to your reservoir. Then at that point in time, you're going to want to measure your concentration of your feed in the water. I also will add mycorrhiza. You can buy bagged, dried mycorrhiza on the internet, and I believe that that's an important instrument in hydroponics. Not a lot of people use it, but I do, and I feel strongly about it. When we test our water, we use I'm using a Com80 tester. You can buy this again, same places. And what it does is it measures electroconductivity, which is basically
a measurement of the salt concentration in the water. And, we know that, table salt is a type of salt, it's sodium chloride. And of course, what we're trying to feed our plants is other minerals, not sodium, but minerals that plant needs. There's a lot of this that comes right in your tap water at home. So if I turn this on, okay, and I hold it in the water coming out of my faucet here in Burnsville, reading at 468 parts per million. Okay, now that measurement is the kinds of salts that we don't want plants to have. So I do have reverse osmosis here. And if I test this in the reverse osmosis, this is still a bit high, at reading at about 65 parts per million. But that's a lot better. I've also measured things like Dasani and bottled water, and they'll come out at 0, but it's not cost effective to buy 25 gallons of Dasani water, is it? So, but rainwater is good, snow, melted snow is good. But make sure you've tested your water and you know where you're starting with that test in that water. So I've added a couple of charts for you with the handout, and these charts will tell you based on the plant that you're growing, what the ideal nutrient level should be for that plant. It might, for instance, broccoli is a real high nutrient user, 1,800 to 2,400 parts per million. When you plant your broccoli, if your broccoli is a little guy like this, not 2,400 parts per million, more like 300 parts per million. As the plant gets bigger, the concentration of food in the water gets to be higher. Lettuce, for the most part, is one of the lowest nutrient demands that we have. It'll thrive at 650 parts per million. So if you're starting that at 150, when the plant is little like that, that's sufficient. And then just keep building that up as you go. You'll find that your water in your reservoir needs to be changed occasionally. Sometimes, depending on how large the reservoir is. So if it's a very small reservoir, like a quart jar, you should change it every week. If it's large, like a 25-gallon tub, then you may get by 2 to 3 weeks with it. So that helps you a little bit with that. This little bottle here, if you can believe it, you pay you pay $10 for a little bottle of water, and but what it does is it's clinically set at 1,000 parts per million. To see if you're getting accurate measurements, then this is going to come in right at 1,000 parts per million. So that's a good way to make sure that your instruments haven't gone all off kilter for you. Extremely important that we have to be testing for is pH, and pH measures our alkalinity or acidity of the water. And you will also note from the charts in your handout that various plants have different acidity levels that they prefer. We're going to quickly test the pH of our RO water here, just to give you an indication. So when you put a couple of drops in there, it's going to turn a color, and we're going to look at that compared to the chart on the bottle, and we see that we're at a pH of about 6.5. Most of our plants prefer it slightly acidic, meaning 6.5 is usually pretty good for most plants. Some plants will go down to a level of 5.0. Anything in there, however, is going to be nice. Now, if you're planting outside, you have hydroponics in the backyard, you're going to find that when it rains, it adjusts your pH real quickly. So if you're outside, you need to be more attentive to pH than if you're inside. Your inside pH will vary, but not real quickly. I've shown in the handouts, you can buy bottles of pH up or pH down. And what happens there is that that's going to adjust your pH very quickly. So don't take a bottle of pH down and dump it in your water, because it has a massive effect very quickly. So a quarter, even an eighth of a cup, couple of tablespoons, start with that, okay, depending on how big your reservoir is. But you can, but be very sparing with your pH. Just add less and test more, okay? So, so this is, I wouldn't spend any money. Matter of fact, I'll confess, I have spent money on electronic pH testers. They don't last very long. They're not very reliable. If you want to spend thousands of dollars, yes, you'll get a good one, but for $50 or $100, you don't. So something like this is very reliable, and it's $10. So that's what I would do. Now, remember, we talked about starting our little guys in rockwool, okay? And remember, rockwool doesn't add a nutrient level to the plant, but it holds a lot of moisture. It doesn't dry out very quickly. I'm usually waiting for these are seed leaves, and then we get into true leaves. That's about the time that I plant it. So I will say that there are true leaves on here, so even though they're small. So we'll pretend we're going to plant this guy today. We take a net cup. Okay, now net cups are going to be available in sizes smaller than this and up to 5-gallon pails. I grow tomatoes, for instance, in 5-gallon pails with a large net cup on it. I will say one thing about, well, I'll say it in a second here. I'll come back to it. So anyway, put your plant in the net cup. Now what you're going to need is some clay pebbles. Yeah, can I use rock out of the backyard? Well, if it's really well washed, but the easiest, cheapest thing to do is just buy yourself some clay pebbles. They're super cheap, and I use them over and over again. But what we're doing is these will add some structure to this net cup, so that this rock wool doesn't float away, and that it gives some basis for this plant to be growing on. So now we've got a sizable amount. I put the rock wool in first because I want good water contact availability in this net cup. Okay, what are you going to grow it in? Well, here's an example, just using a 1-quart mason jar. It's as simple as that. Fill this up with nutrient and put this out on the window in the greenhouse or conservatory or kitchen window or whatever you've got. And now, one comment you can notice: quick spray can with painted this black. If you plant in a clear jar like this is just kind of reusing the device that we get at Costco when we're buying tulips in the spring, and figure, well, why not sit here and watch some lettuce grow? So, but this, however, will grow algae in about a week. So plan on dumping all this water out every week, cleaning this thing out a little bit, and then putting the plants back in. Same is true with this little guy here. But what you will find is that this is, remember we talked about the Kraki method? So what we're having here is that the roots are going to come down tremendously. You're going to be very impressed with all the root growth that you've got. Okay, when you go to empty this, make a point of how full it is, and then fill it back to that level. Don't take a half a jar, okay, that the roots are nice and float in the water, and then fill it all the way up and then drown the roots that are there, because we know that the roots need air also. So that'll give you, you can plant as many of these as you want. So as from a quart jar to a big greenhouse somewhere along the line, it's going to fit you, it's going to work, and you're going to be a hydroponic grower all by yourself. With that, thank you very much. I appreciate the fact that you spent the time with me and discussed such a fun fun way to garden all year round.